State
I think it
fossil and
tells
the
me
state
everything I need to
rock are
know
the
about
same thing.
you. Like, why do you know these things? But the ear only has but so many sounds it can listen to in its life, and you just took a couple of mine.
Is that true? It's like the
No,
heart.
obviously that's not true.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Rock and roll.
All right, let's hit it. I'm in a mystery location right now, Douglas. I'm in the 49th state admitted to the union. Any guesses?
The 49th state?
Oh, wait, I misspoke. The 48th state admitted to the union.
The places I would have guessed, I'm pretty sure you're not in. Because I thought like Alaska and Hawaii came up first, but I know you're not there. I'm gonna go ahead and throw out Nevada.
Ooh, it's a good guess. No, apparently Arizona was the last state of the continuous states to be admitted to the union. I just
Really?
learned that today. Yeah, 48th state, Hobie.
Where do you get? Do you look at theonion.com? Where do you get your facts?
Well, this is embarrassingly enough from Wikipedia, so could be wrong.
Okay, fair enough. No, that's interesting.
One more Arizona quiz for you. What is the state fossil?
The state fossil?
Yes.
I don't even know what example. The femur of a lion? Like, I don't know what is what is
All right, the state fossil is petrified wood. Now
that's pretty close, I think.
Yeah, no, you did great. But what's the state rock?
I don't know. Number 2 pencil graphite.
The state rock is also petrified wood, which kind of, I'm not talking trash about Arizona here. I like Arizona. That's the reason I'm here. But that kind of tells you all you need to know about Arizona, doesn't it?
I think it tells me everything I need to know about you. Like, why do you know these things? But the ear only has but so many sounds it can listen to in its life, and you just took a couple of mine.
Is that true? It's like the heart?
Obviously that's not true. It's probably also listed in that Wikipedia article somewhere.
All right, let's jump into it.
Yeah, can we get back to some sense around these parts? Last time I'm like singing praises about Excel for 35 minutes, and this time you're talking about fossils. So we really gotta rein it in. Where's our production team?
So let me kick off with things that I found super interesting this week. I've been fascinated with the technology of crypto, although I'm still building my thoughts around the use case of crypto. One of the most fascinating ones is Stellar, which I've sent you some coin as we play around with that. Stellar's strategy is really interesting to me. So they inked a deal with the Ukrainian government a while back, trying to build out basically blockchain technology for that government. And they just signed a deal with basically, as I understand, it's like a stable coin in Nigeria that matches the stable coin matches that currency. And so Stellar's one of their big use cases or pitches is remittance payments. And so this is with a company that has operations in London and Nigeria. They've become, they're kind of trying to formally enter that space. The reason I found this so fascinating is because we, like 5 episodes back, tried to dig up some contacts living on, or friends of friends of friends, right? Living on less than $10 a day, because we wanted to see if we could leverage this technology to shoot some cash their way.
Yeah, redistribute
and
the
see,
bubble.
Yeah, right. See what that does. Curiosity as much as maybe it can help a few folks, right? Well, so the founder of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, who's a really interesting dude and a good interview if you've run across him, has basically a charity called Give Crypto. Have we talked about this, Doogles?
No, we haven't. Tell me more about it.
Give Crypto is super fascinating because it's kind of our use case. It's kind of like, hey, we see this technology coming, and there's a way to redistribute the bubble, redistribute the wealth. But what Give crypto has found is that it's really tough to find kind of the poorest of the poor with a smartphone that are of the mindset of like, oh, someone in the Western world might be willing to send me money to help, these basic necessities. That's just not the way you think about it, right? It's not even like on your radar, right? And that makes perfect sense. Like if you're worried about getting clean water or, keeping people healthy, it's not like you're going, oh, if I had a smartphone, there's probably new resources available to me that I'm not even aware. Like you don't even know what crypto is, So I just read through their website and kind of watched what they've been doing over the last 6 months. And it seems like they've been having a tough time finding the right people to redistribute the bubble to. But they like the concept and the idea. So if you like that concept, I'd say give them a follow or give them a read. It's givecrypto.org. Really fascinating stuff. And I've reached out to them because I want more information. I'd like to see if we could maybe partner. But they're moving more to an ambassador model, which is you find someone, maybe it's Nigeria, maybe it's somewhere else, that is kind of connected to the Western world, but also connected to the people of most need. And you give funds to them to help distribute in the communities, which is, again, super, super cool. I still love this concept of a direct one-to-one ability to transfer funds. But it doesn't seem like the world's quite there yet, but who knows where the world will be in 6 months or 5 years, right?
That's crazy. That's really cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. So let me know if you hear back from them too, but I'm gonna check it out in the meantime.
Yeah, absolutely. So then let me build on that before we hop into the fishbowl. So as I've learned more about the crypto space, the thing that's fascinating to me right now that I came across this week, and again, not investment advice, I don't have a significant portion of my funds in any of this stuff I'm going to talk about, but it is by far the most interesting stuff that I see going on right now. And there's a lot of really smart people here, so I've gravitated towards it. But that's crypto index funds. Now, have you ever heard of this, Doogles?
I don't think so. I know the crypto mom in the SEC. She's talked about how the crypto ETF should be a thing, but that might be different than what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, no, there's some similarities there, and there's a big push to get crypto ETFs legal within the U.S. markets. Right now, I think you can buy one over the OTC. It's by Bitwise, and I think the ticker is BITW. But if I remember right, that's market weighted. So if you're market weighted in crypto right now, it's basically a Bitcoin fund because Bitcoin has 70% of the market cap, and then Ethereum has the next 10 or 15%. Those two dominate the entire market cap.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I would assume that.
What's been interesting to me, if you talk about the investment hypothesis of a crypto index fund, is Bitcoin is the least interesting by a factor of 100 to me of what's happening in the space. I mean, Bitcoin, even the people that are fans will basically tell you it's digital gold. Well, I don't really think gold is a great investment strategy, right? So Bitcoin is the Kleenex of the space. It deserves a lot of credit for the branding and helping people understand what's possible. But a market cap weighted index fund is not interesting to me because there's easy ways to hold Bitcoin if that's your cup of tea, right? What's been more interesting to me is this hypothesis that I've talked about the last couple of weeks. It's what if this is the .com bubble, right? And what if you have pets.com, but you also have Amazon, Yahoo, Google, everything else. And so what if 90% of the stuff is going to completely go bust, not be worth anything, but holding on to the ones that turn into the next Google in terms of the way they kind of transmit money throughout the world? What if there's an interesting hypothesis there? And so what I've come across this week is a fund called the Crypto 20 that tries to hold the top 20 funds, not market cap weighted, but I think that's redistributed weekly, actually. It's an interesting hypothesis. Basically, they're saying we want exposure to the entire space.
Yeah, so let me hop in for a moment because I think basically if you take on what you were saying, your analogy around the .com bubble, right? The .com times. I think that's a good one. And I'd also mix that in with what you've talked about before with regard to finding like the use case, right? The utility of it.
Yes.
And I think the utility of it is going to be much more important than the coin itself. So even that like 20 coin situation, it's not about the coins. Like all of them might fail, because effectively like what we're looking for right now, I think, is the protocol, right, that sits on top of blockchain that's then going to make it that's then going to figure out what the right use case is. And so it could be none of the coins. It might not really be like Bitcoin might be the only thing, right, that ends up actually from a pure like a currency perspective, because it has the most ubiquity right now. Bitcoin might be all that matters, but at some point someone's going to find the right use case, the right protocol, and maybe one of those coins is the thing, but it's not about the coin. Like the coin doesn't even end up mattering.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, this is a really interesting debate, and what's unique about this, or how my hypothesis is evolving, is I'm starting to think that basically these are companies that are building really useful technologies, but we don't know which one's going to win. In most cases, the company that say they ultimately turn into the Google, that coin would have significant value because of the way most of these currencies are structured. Now,
well, hold on. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off for a moment. I think that there's probably going to be a spike in that coin when that company does that. But I don't think that the company will, and who knows, but I don't think the company is going to be able to hold a monopoly over that use case in the end. So that there'll probably be a spike because there's an association, but why would they end up owning the space with that one coin?
Well, some of these things, and we'll, if this is an interesting debate for us, and if the listeners are possibly interested, we can bring on some more experts in the space for sure to talk about this. But in a lot of cases, these companies use that coin to be like create a maker taker market for the exchange of funds. And so the more money that runs through the pipes, the more demand there is for that coin, and therefore the more value there is for that coin. So as a holder of that coin, you would also see a decent return. But it's a complicated space. It's way more complex than saying like Yahoo's going to do great, and I'm just going to hold an equity investment in Yahoo. Now, a lot of these initial coin offerings are structured in a way that I think has some similarities to it. Equity investment, and therefore holding the coin has some similarities to holding equity, but I don't claim to know all the answers here. I mean, I think I need to do more research. Really, I really do.
Yeah, I think it probably is worth us figuring out who to bring on maybe to talk about it. Feeding off of the analogy that you brought up, I use the word protocol in a deliberate fashion, because in some ways, as we talk about this, it's almost like to me, it's almost like someone figures out HTTP, right, back in the 90s as the right transfer protocol for information over the internet. And then us saying that the organization that figures out HTTP, if there's I'm going to make a leap here, but there was a coin associated with that transfer protocol, now that's what's going to do it. And I'm saying whoever comes with HTTP, that just becomes the protocol, and you actually have to make it ubiquitous to be successful. So therefore you can't limit it to a coin. Who knows what direction it takes, but that's where my brain starts to go. And that's why I think there might be a spike in that coin initially, but then ultimately you have to say, actually, like it can't be a walled garden.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that comparison, and I think it could be a fair one, especially with like Ethereum, right? So lots of stuff gets built on top of it, but does that really mean that it needs to be valuable, or is it just kind of a protocol? To your analogy, I think it's just fascinating. Let me wrap this in like the next 5 minutes because it all ties together. So if you buy any of those, that potential, I'll call it an investment hypothesis. What's crazy right now is like the crypto 20, which I would probably put a few bucks in if it was easy to buy. The crypto 20 is really tough to buy. It's available on 4 exchanges that are like in South Africa and Hong Kong and Australia. And if you do any digging, at least when I do digging, I go, man, there's a 50% chance my funds are just going to get evaporated or my identity is going to be stolen. Like if I do this, it just doesn't feel, it feels a little fishy because it's new in the space. Doesn't feel safe. So there are ways, and same with all these other coin exchanges. Like you can go have access to 500 coins with some exchange that operates out of China that doesn't feel trustworthy, or you can buy potentially like 40 coins with something like Coinbase or Coinbase Pro that's operated in the US and deals with all the US regulation. And there's a reason for that, because it's very easy to rip someone off. I mean, me and you could make a coin tomorrow, go out and try and raise $100 million, and it could be a complete scam. So there's no good way for, well, I shouldn't say that. There's limited ways for an investor to act on a hypothesis that says, I want to hold 20 or 100 of the top coins going on, and I want to find a way to have exposure to those winners long term. But I think I found a way where you can write some Python code and basically build your own index with US-based exchanges. And so I'm going to play around with that in the next couple of weeks. I'll let you know how it goes, because what I like about this is it's just so underdeveloped compared to the equity markets, right? If I told you that I wanted to buy the top 50 funds with some certain value strategy or some certain momentum strategy, I'd have like 5 ETFs to pick from tomorrow. And I'd open up my phone and I'd buy it and I'd have exactly what I want. In crypto, you can't do that right now. And so I don't know, the fact that the space hasn't gone through puberty right now, like, or maybe it's an adolescence, maybe it's a toddler, I don't know. It's really interesting because you can't just be like, oh, I think this is a unique approach and I want to attack that. It doesn't exist. You basically have to build it from scratch.
In the past 10 weeks, how have you gone from like dirt cheap value investor to I'm writing Python code to mine crypto ETF creator?
I love it. So one, I haven't, because all my money's still in value. So thank you for mentioning that. But two, this is super, it's like, I feel like you're in 1903 watching the equity markets be built, but you're watching them be built around the world by people with smartphones. And just to pull back the covers on that is really fascinating. So, but Doogles, I really appreciate you bringing this up. Like, this is not a good investment in my eyes. I don't have any money, or I don't have any meaningful money. Like, I have pennies in this sort of stuff, enough to play around with the technology, because I think there's a lot of fraud and most of these things are worth absolutely nothing in my eyes. That does not mean that it's not a fascinating space for me right now. So I'm just kind of playing around with it. I really blame the podcast. This is all your fault.
Sorry, not sorry. Can we dive into the fishbowl for a moment to build off of that the fraud piece, having nothing to do with crypto, but so SPACs are SPAC, special purpose acquisition companies, and they're basically like shell companies that can go public. And then they're on the market then to buy another company. And through that acquisition, they then take that other company public. So it's an easier way for a company to actually to go public, because you don't have to go through all the due diligence with bankers, right, et cetera. If you want to go public, you have a SPAC buy you, and now you're a public company, right? So lots of companies have actually gone public in this way in history, but especially over the last year. And one thing that I think is interesting, and this isn't necessarily directly go to fraud, but I want to get your take on something, because the total number of IPOs is like going off the chain right now.
Yeah.
Like to give you a sense, back in the last IPO cray times was like 99, 2000, right? Where you had in 2000, you had a little under 500, and let me check, 486 is the stat I'm looking at, companies that went public. And in 2000, it was 429, right? So a bunch of companies there. In 2020, we had about 450 companies go public. So not quite at that 1999 level, but so far, we're like mid-March-ish, right? We just passed the Ides of March, and we've had 331 companies that have gone public in 2021. In 3 months, we're getting there, right? Of those 331 companies, 275 of them are SPACs. 83% of the companies that have gone public are SPACs. So as I'm looking at that, SPACs, I don't think this is like a hard, fast rule, but generally, SPACs have about 2 years to make an acquisition, right? The people that are investing in the SPAC say, you can use this blank check we're giving you over the next 2 years to buy companies. And right now they've got, I think, over $100 billion that of these SPACs that have gone public in 2021, they have 2 years to spend $100 billion taking other companies public. What are the implications of that? Is what's going on in my head. I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, it's people are throwing a lot of money in the fireplace. So the IPO thing, some people use that as a gauge of a bubble. I think that's another thing you can add to the 20 other factors we've talked about over the past several months about potential bubbles here. But the SPAC stuff, yeah, it gives people a blank check. But even if there's not a formal timeline that you have to spend it by, though the people in those SPACs, like when you're shopping for a car and maybe a bonus comes in, and having that money in your bank account makes you maybe make a less rational decision because you're like, oh, I got the money, I need this, they're sitting around having to send updates to their investors about what they're going to buy and how they're going to put those funds to use. Historical performance of SPACs is terrible. Meb Faber is much more of an expert than me. He's done some really good stuff. I've seen other literatures. I'll try and throw that on the Twitter, but people are just throwing money into the fireplace. This is going to end badly. I know someone like Chamath will say that SPACs are great because it allows people like me and you access to companies in the private markets that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. And we're just supposed to give him a blank check so he can go invest in those companies for us. I'm sure, in 1% of cases, it might work out that way. But right now, there's a supply demand piece. Right? Like if one SPAC opened up with a super great management team, maybe that would hold true. There's too much capital in the market right now. So everything's going to get, any decent private company that a SPAC is looking to acquire is going to have 10 suitors instead of one suitor, which means even if it's a good investment, they're going to overpay for it, which might turn it into a bad investment. I'm super scared of this space. I will not participate. There's no way.
No, it's insane. I mean, I think you nailed it. In that scarcity can lead to like diligence, right? And when you don't have scarcity, when you have this like crazy surplus of capital that's sitting out there, you're going to get through all of the good stuff and then say, well, I still have $50 billion to spend. So what am I going to get? And you're just going to start willy-nilly, buying organizations. We're going to have some retail investor and institutional investor money that's chasing silly-dilly, willy-nilly. And that is going to be just crazy, right?
No, so my question is who wrote these blank checks to the SPACs? Like the people that were that had made historic returns over the past decade in equities, who was like, I'm not satisfied with my current investment options and I have to go to riskier. Yeah, I don't understand. I just don't get it. I would never write a check to a SPAC.
In here, so I'm gonna dive back in the fishbowl for the other topic. And this isn't a SPAC, right? But who's writing checks? SoftBank seems to continually enjoy writing checks for nonsense. It's like in the memo line, I think it says, yes, we do know this is nonsense when they write these checks. So Greensill Capital was because about 10 days ago declared insolvency. Greensill Capital was a supply chain finance company. So you can kind of think about this as I don't know, have you gone deep into Greensill?
No.
Skippy. So it's a supply chain finance company. So basically, if you can think of it as if you're an organization that has invoices, right, that people are sending you, the Greensill would buy that invoice at some discount so that people get paid faster. So instead, if you said, I'm going to pay this invoice in 30 days, they would say, well, actually, I'm going to buy that invoice for 90% of it, and I'm going to pay you in 2 days, right? And so the organization that's waiting for their money, they get their money faster.
Which is, basically financing. It's just another type.
Like, that is what it is, right? So but with that alone, no issues. The issue was that Mr. Greensill basically said, we're gonna democratize supply chain financing. Why? I don't know. But this was something that apparently he's been obsessed about, and he could do it for low rates. It has all of the bullet points of something that's not going to work out, right? I'm going to democratize this thing. I can do it for cheaper because I have proprietary technology that can do it better than anyone else. oh, what's that technology? Oh, well, don't worry about the man behind the curtain, right? Is effectively what happened. People that are that worked at the company are coming out and saying their proprietary technology was basically like Google Sheets, and so there wasn't any. But of course, we've got David Cameron, the former UK Prime Minister, as an advisor. SoftBank was a big investor. WeWork, anybody? As well, right? They just keep writing checks to nonsense. Now people are getting screwed over because they were on a path to Greensill was on a path to a $40 billion IPO. And instead they just declared insolvency. Like that is how are those two things like being considered in the same couple month period? So anyway, sorry.
Well,
I was reading about this thing and I was like, we're crazy. We're at a crazy time is
yeah. And that's fair. I think talking weekly gets you forget that we've covered how much of a bubble we're in, and then 3 more weeks go by and you go, why are people being so crazy? And you kind of forget, oh, it's because we're in a massive bubble and it hasn't popped yet. This all reminds me, I hate to say it, but of Enron. And there was a podcast this week, I think it's called White Collar Crime, with the former CFO Andy Fastow. Did you catch this, Doogles?
No, I haven't listened to it yet, but it's on the queue. That's what I call the queue.
So I won't spoil it for you, but it's just fascinating. It's basically a whole debate about what I did wasn't technically illegal. And so what does that mean? Like, was it actually, he starts off, I think he's taking credit for all the people who basically he destroyed their retirement and stuff. So I don't want to give the impression like he's not contrite, and I don't personally know the guy. This is the first I'd heard him speak. But he'll give a lot of examples about accounting policy today in ways that seem misleading, but is technically true. And really fascinating listen, because I think his point is simply that you can do almost anything you want within accounting policy and call it legal. And that doesn't mean, and outside of that is this line of what's actually right. Yep. Accounting policy isn't what is actually right?
Yep. And if you haven't, I recommend reading Conspiracy of Fools about Enron. It's like a phenomenal book. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I hope doesn't lead to a baby bathwater type situation.
I mean, what situation is that? What are we throwing out here?
Are you familiar with? Are your kids valuable?
Don't even start with me.
No, but basically, like, if you take SOX, for example, like Sarbanes-Oxley, which came out of all of the scandals that happened about 20 years ago, I think you start to hit into a little bit of baby bathwater situation. Like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because you say, well, how is it that these companies could get away with this stuff for so long? Let's change all the practices and all the regulations in order to prevent it. And I think that type of blunt instrument, it doesn't get to the heart of the issue. And I think you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think we need to figure out like how you really prevent this stuff from happening. And you can't just say it's not just the accounting practices. Like it goes a little bit beyond that, I think. And so I think we need to really figure out, get like a root cause analysis type situation in this, and not take a blunt instrument to it. I mean, because you can basically, if you look at SOX, right, that happened 20 years ago, that's the reason why a number of people name that as a core reason as to why companies are waiting so much longer to go public, right? You sit private for so long,
yes,
because it's so hard to go public. And then what do you get when these companies want liquidity, or when their employees might want liquidity, or if they want more capital? You end up having these huge companies that might end up going public via a SPAC, right? And you have SPACs that then take the due diligence out of the way, because the due diligence is so difficult. And so we have to think more clearly about downstream implications of these blunt instruments we start throwing out.
Yeah. So the last point for that Andy Fastow interview that I just think, I think this is a really solid point on his behalf, is he talked about an oil company that he did some consulting for after he got out of jail, that's quite a sentence, right? I got hired for a Fortune 500 company to do financial consulting after I got out of jail. But
catch me if you can.
they were doing proven reserves at $90 a barrel, right? And current price of oil was like 50. So he's going, are they being deceitful? Like, is this a fraud? I mean, they're basically overstating their proven reserves by almost double, right? Well, what it turns out is actually happening is the accounting rules say, I think it's take a 5-year average of the oil price from the last 5 years, and then at year end of the previous year, that equals $90. That's what you should do your accounting for if this is a live example for 2021. Well, that's typically a great model, and in 95% of the cases is probably a prudent accounting standard. But if oil falls off a cliff in 3 months, is it fair to your investors to say my reserves are worth twice as much as they are now? It could be, because it's probably, a short-term dip, and it will probably move back closer to that $90 a barrel. But it also could be incredibly deceitful, and it could be something you are doing intentionally to try and mislead the mainstream investors, right?
Yeah.
So
and
what's
that
the right
intent
approach
is
there?
super important. I think, it probably really comes down to governance.
Yeah, but at some point we ask too much of our governance bodies, don't we? I mean, to regulate
I don't mean government. Sorry, I meant like board governance. Like, how
Yeah,
do we
okay.
incentivize the boards of companies, right, in order to make sure that they kind of keep their act together? It makes me think about sorry if this is too much of a tangent, get your Gong Show hook and bring me back in. But have you read what's it called, Clash of Cultures?
No.
The Clash of Cultures, it's Bogle's, I think it's Bogle's last book, maybe,
Okay.
before he passed away a couple years ago. John Bogle, or Jack Bogle as his friends knew him, was the founder of Vanguard. And what he was talking about was basically, in this book, was investment versus speculation. But a big part of the book as well, because he just believes, if you look at Vanguard, he's like, basically just put your money into a low cost passive index fund and you'll be golden. But he's discussing the history of the mutual fund markets and talking about governments of mutual funds, how you have like two separate companies. There's like the management company of the fund and then the investing company of the fund. And the incentive structure is such that you basically don't need to protect your investors, because you're really working for the management company, like, in the end. And so they're not incentivized to serve investors,
Yeah.
especially not retail investors, because institutional is so big now. And I think it's similar. Like, how do you incentivize the governance of the board governance for companies in a way such that they need to like keep the company's act together, right? And shouldn't be able to get away with this type of stuff.
Well,
and I think
but
that's really what it's about.
Yeah, but that's very, very hard, because most of your board of directors is incentivized strongly with equity. And so they really care about the stock price. And in this case, the stock price is almost undoubtedly going to be better if your proven reserves on your 10K are double what they would be in maybe a fair assessment of the facts. So
it makes sense. Do you think there's a way to have a longer term focus on that? Because to me, it makes sense that the incentive structure would you'd be incentivized by the value of the company. I think that makes perfect sense, right? It's just, how do you get to a place where you're incentivized by the long term value of the company and not the short term value of the company?
It's a very tough challenge. I don't know. Sometimes the solution to a lot of these problems is you just hire decent people, but that's easier said than done. I don't know. I think we should have a whole episode on that, and maybe bring in some people smarter than us to talk to it, because the incentivization, the correct incentives, as Munger would say, is like, I mean, that's critical to so much of life. But creating the correct incentives is really, really hard.
Yeah, but there's got to be something there. Like, and it's never this simple, and this type of stuff will never go through because there's too much money on the other side. But I would think either some sort of lockup period. You have like a 6-month lockup period after an IPO that folks can't sell it. You have some kind of a lockup period, or the tax incentive is such that you have, instead of the 1 year long term capital gains rate, there's like a 5 year or something like that. I'm just, making this up off the top of my head, but I would think there's some way that you can incentivize such that it's like just a huge, massive financial cliff if you care more about what happens tomorrow versus caring about what happens in, 5 years.
Because I was doing a deep dive on taxes this week, in part because it's kind of tax season, right? And I still feel like long-term capital gains tax is a little much. Now, it got increased with the Affordable Care Act and some other things recently, but
you think it's high? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was like 23.8% or something in the right income tax range. And
yep.
I would love to see maybe another bracket there, a 5-year holding period, because I think it could evolve a lot of investing strategies in a way that makes sense long term. Like it, almost always, the longer holding period, the better. If you have a sound investment strategy. So, do you follow what I'm saying here? Like, only one break. There should be a difference in how you're rewarded for holding something 5 years or 10 years as opposed to 13 months. Like, those are two entirely different things.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a line in there, and who knows what the exact time period should be, where something is not an investment. I would even say that, and I have 1 year holding periods on things too, right? But based on whatever my model will say, but that's not really an investment. I think if you're only holding something for a year, I mean, it might be an investment. Sorry, I think it can be an investment for the individual. Like you could be saying I'm making that as an investment, but it's not really an investment in the company.
Yeah. Well, and I actually got some questions this week on why my holding strategy is a year. My holding strategy is a year typically because of a quantitative model that I'm leveraging with a value investing philosophy, rather than necessarily like in a lot of cases, I'd prefer to have a longer holding period. So we could do a deep dive on why we chose the holding periods we did. But one of the reasons 1 year makes sense for me is because I don't have as much time as I'd like to do a deep dive into every company I invest in, figure out an absolute fair value assessment. I mean, like the way someone like Klarman does it is he knows exactly what he thinks the company is worth. And when it reaches that point, he's going to sell. My hack with the quantitative strategy is saying in about a year, I expect it to be near fair value, and therefore I'm going to turn over my portfolio and go into things that are cheaper, right?
Yep. And I mean, I even, there are some stocks that I own based on the model that when the model tells me to sell it, I may just transfer it into a different account because I actually believe like they're companies that I want to hold for the long term.
Yep.
Not just because of the model. Most of them don't fit into that, but there are like 2 or 3 that kind of fit into that, and those are ones that I'm like truly invested in. And I would like to have bought even if the model didn't tell me to. But yeah, it's interesting. I think there's some kind of I'd love to talk more about that incentive structure and maybe talk to some people that think about that all the time, because there's got to be something that can be done there. But you have to figure out, it's a Venn diagram between what would work and what could feasibly actually go into action, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so to your point, just like hire good people and incentivize them to stay good, I think is the real answer.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Anything else in the fishbowl? I'm gonna have to early.
Yeah, I have one quick thing in the fishbowl, and that's have you read about the 1 million Black Women initiative that Goldman has put out there?
I just saw the headline. I'd love more info.
Yeah. So, well, the thing is, there actually isn't that much more than the headline, and so right. I wish they'd actually like done something as opposed to just announcing things they will do. But yet and still, I think that there's something in this. So Goldman put out this report called Black Womenomics. Let's ignore that title for a moment.
That's a terrible name.
I mean, I don't know who in PR was like, yeah, let's go with that one. But they put out this report that outlined the wealth gap, basically. And so they're saying that Black women hold 90% less wealth than white men, right? And a significant part of that is because there's this earnings gap that has continued to widen over the last like 20, 30 years. So Black women currently make 15% less on average than white women and 35% less than white men. In the 80s, the 1980s, the earnings gap was 5% between Black and white women. So there's a 3x increase, right? And the earnings gap that's happened over the last 30, 40 years. And only 0.5% of Black women own their own businesses. So like white men are 24 times more likely to own their own business, right? So they pointed out like there's this gap. So what Goldman's doing is they're investing, what they say they're going to do is they're investing $10 billion in Black women-led businesses over the next decade. And then they're going to put $100 million in philanthropy in addition to that. And two things I like. One is that I just like generally think that making this investment is just like awesome, cool, like do that. The second is they're upfront about the incentive, right? Like from what I read, Goldman isn't saying like we are an incredible group of people and therefore we want to do really nice things for people. Like that's not how they came out and framed it. They came out and said this group of people are meaningful to the economy. And so if we want to be able to make money in the future, we need them to be successful. Like they basically straight up just came out and said that, which I just think for the symbol of capitalism, I think in the US, I think it's meaningful that they're at least somewhat upfront about that. So they basically said like, if we make this investment, we can add 1.7 million jobs and grow GDP by an additional 2%. And so like, we should do that, right? And so I wish that they, one, had named it something different, because Black Womenomics is like not a thing I ever want to say again. And two, I wish that they'd actually done something with it and then made the announcement, because it just like I looked over many articles to try and figure out like what they were actually going to do. And the amount of detail they ever got to was just we're going to invest $10 billion in Black women-led businesses. And like, so what does that mean? I don't know, but I'm glad it's happening. But I want to drop that, get your thoughts, and make sure that lyric was out there.
Yeah, those facts are crazy. I love the info there. These are, as we've talked about, these are really tough challenges to solve. I'm strongly with you though. One, in hating the name.
Yes.
It's not a good name. But
at the same time, of course, if Goldman's going to come out with something, they're going to name it something terrible like this. Like that's just it's not.
I think for now I applaud the effort, and then I need to get more information and kind of dig in. But it's better than nothing. That's what I'd say.
I'm looking forward to seeing some specifics. Like I wish that they had said anything like we're investing $10 billion and we're going to start by creating like a Black female focused accelerator, and we're going to start by, or something. But it's just a big number, and so We're going to come out with a big number. So, but yeah, I agree. Better than nothing.
What's crazy about those big numbers though, I've been thinking about this with March Madness, but like, what's the difference in you signing up to play someone's March Madness pool for like the possibility of $1 million prize, or like a $10 million prize, or like $100,000 prize? One, I guess with those things, I know I'm not going to win, but we also know the human brain really struggles once you get above, like people struggle to comprehend the difference between $1 trillion and $1 billion and even $1 million, right? So I wonder if there's corporate strategies. Anytime someone comes out with this new philanthropic thing, if they actually pick a number that's meaningful, or if they just try and pick a number that sounds meaningful.
Once you get over a certain number, it just gets into the category of big or unachievable, and then they're all just the same, right? And if you throw out something big enough, it'll sound, to your point, sound meaningful, and it's really more about the PR of it versus the substance.